Hello, this is Cage from CubePunks, and boy oh boy, people are excited that Mario and Luigi, the RPG series, and not the characters, are back. It's been a while since they've had a new game, and this time around, it's going to be fully 3D, with an art style that a lot of people find really appealing. Given that I'm somebody who does a lot of character modeling and animation for game projects I've done myself, I want to give a little bit of insight on how they were able to get this appealing style through clever usages of shaders. Alright, so we have Blender set up and a couple primitive shapes and a reference image of the Mario. Now, there's multiple ways to do cartoony art styles within 3D. However, I'm going to give an approximation of the methods used to recreate specifically the red coloring on Mario here within Blender. However, these general principles can be applied to pretty much any other software. So first thing first, we have the black outline. What's being done here is that we're using the back face culling inverted hole method of drawing back outlines on the 3D object. What's going on here is that there's a shell that is drawn around the object, and when you turn on backface culling, which only makes polygons visible through one direction, you will see that the inside filling color is now visible. And now there is a little bit of gap space between the shell and the inside filling. That gap space gives the illusion of illustrated outlines. I did a previous episode that goes into more detailed explanations of how this specifically works, and also a nifty add-on that automates the process for you. But for the colors themselves, well, right now, it's just shading it like a standard material within Blender, following more photorealistic principles of light source calculations. How do we get it to be more stylized? So you're going to need this combination in Blender. However, if you're just viewing and you're not really wanting to do it yourself, this is the part that you need to be paying attention to. You're using a color ramp here. How this works is that it's just taking all the colors from the lightest point to the darkest points and then remaps the darkest value. So all black becomes this color, all white becomes this color, and all red becomes this color. And any other colors in between here gradates between these points. However, if you want to get that hard cell shade look, you make it this. So now it becomes a binary where any color at this specific middle point in terms of light and darkness, it pops in to the dark or the light. This is the more or less the way that cell shading in a game like Guilty Gear is done. However, you do run across specific issues when you try to apply this method of shading for characters. Specifically, you got to do a lot of manual adjustments with making sure that the shadows are casted correctly on the faces. This is done by going into every single polygon and adjusting the normals. These are mathematical rays on every individual polygon that shoot out facing forward. By default, what is forward is going to look a little ugly and janky. However, if you redefine forward, aka adjust the normals, you get this looking effect. This whole entire process is very technical, heady, and takes a lot of work to get to look correct, like, say, Guilty Gear. It's entirely possible, however, you have to do an entirely different pipeline of production compared to what is standard for 3D, something that Arc System Works was able to get correctly for their game, and other people have been able to reverse engineer it and figure out how they did it as well. But at the end of the day, the people who know how to make models that look like this right here, that's a bit of a niche right now. And in the case of a fighting game, you're going to have a lot more fine-tuned control of the camera, as well as also control contexts of the environments that the characters are existing within. In an RPG, however, you're going to need to have a wholly interactable world here. So trying to make sure that all of these environments and contexts are going to have correct lighting and the rendering is going to look right. It's going to be a lot of work. And one traditionally common solution towards this problem is just painting on the shadows, painting on the shading. If you look at this model here by Yan Sculpts, the topology and the geometry just looks like this, but when it's rendered, it looks like this. There is no light source calculations being done. It's just an image wrapping over the 3D model. And what the image is basically, well, if you have ever seen any of those people who take an anime figure and decide to paint it to make it look more like cel-shaded animated, they're painting on the lighting, okay? And that's basically what's going on here. They're painting on the lighting. And this is a common approach. A lot of games like League of Legends do this. However, Mario and Luigi Brothership is not going with this approach, because as you see, the shadows are interacting dynamically with the lighting of the environment. And a really solid workaround to this is really just adjusting the level of midtones in the object. By making the in-between space less harsh and having a little bit of slight gradation, you're going to be able to hit points where if the light hits those awkward angles, it becomes softer. So instead of getting messed up calculations that look like this, you just get it smoothed out right here. We've covered over the color ramp and the usages of easing and adjusting the points of where the contrast gets remapped. But there is something noticeable. These reds right here just look a lot better than these reds right here. What's going on? Well, simple answer is really just some color theory adjustments. Now, this is not perfect. However, this is a rough approximation of what's going on here over here. And you notice that the darkest points, the darkest shadows, are much more blue. Because look here, the darkest shadows here are more of a bluey purple. And the lightest points are going to be a different hue than your midtones right here. The thing is, if you only adjust the contrast, but if you keep the hues about the same, your coloring tends to not have as much of a pop if you adjust both the hue and contrast of the colors when you're doing shading. Offsetting hues as well as the contrast when doing shading is a common trick that a lot of illustration uses. Lead animator of Friday Night Funkin', Phantom Arcade, does a really good example of this with his art style. Look at some of his artwork and even maybe take a color picker and look at the color choices. His shadows and highlights are usually more blue or red compared to the base tone. There's a lot of good training resources and people out there that understand a lot of the technical principles that you have when you do 3D modeling and animation. However, not as many people have the illustrative background and eye to make the observations of like, oh yeah, this red right here is actually more, it's actually a purple. It's not just red anymore. So as funny as it sounds, if you want to make models as good as this, while sure, the tricks I showed you for the outlines and the inner coloring, you just use those tricks, fine-tune the adjustments a little bit more, and you'll get something just as good as Mario over here. But the other part of this equation simply is get some practice and background within drawing. If you're going to be trying to emulate illustration, you need to also be, well, proficient within illustration of itself. Even though, like, the big game I want to eventually make is going to be 3D animation, I still put in a lot of effort trying to learn how to draw and illustrate better. Because me learning how to make better colors in a drawing such as this and understanding how shading works better, that will majorly influence when I get into making a model within Blender and animating that model. And hopefully it will end up looking more like this. Okay, well, I'm done yapping today. Hopefully you found this video helpful or inciting. Check out our website, cubepunks.com. We have a bunch of games that we've developed up on it. And also you can easily find our social medias such as DeviantArt. We have DeviantArt. We have Twitter, Stinky Twitter. And if you want to be really cool, give us a little bit of money on Ko-fi. All right, that's it for now. See ya.